All right. Welcome as I correct the lighting so I don't look like a ghost. Welcome everyone to day 9 of our 10-day fasting series. If you don't know and can't read, my name is DJ Eshelman and glad to be here with you once again. Quick update. I have completed the water only portion of the fast. I think I talked about this yesterday, but we are transitioning off slowly. Because if you have only had water for several days and you try to eat a bunch of food, you will be positively miserable and potentially even put yourself in the hospital in some cases I've heard of. So, yeah, just fair warning. Don't do that. So the way I've been transitioning off is Monday. I started with some vegetable juices. When I say vegetable juices, I mean vegetable juices like leafy greens only. Very minimal carbohydrates to those. Very much um, spinach and celery and that sort of thing, just to kind of restart those enzymes in your stomach and get them reinvigorated before you go on to other things. And then yesterday I started some, or I should say, whew, what day is it? It gets a little confusing because of the way we started the fast. We have been following it's kind of a traditional, it's actually a Jewish traditional thing of the day starting at sundown, not as we think of it, like whenever we get up. So the way this works is that the day of fasting starts at 6 o'clock. So technically, I just realized that, or sundown. So technically, I realized that I'm actually technically doing this on day 10, if you want to get technical about it. But nonetheless, today I started with some um, solid foods. Solid, it makes me sound like, yeah, much worse than it is. Uh, Things like avocado is what I started with yesterday, and then this morning. Actually, this morning I just had some juices, and then went into some avocado with um, celery. That's what it was. And actually, just I didn't quite finish before I started here, but I sautéed some carrots and in a little bit of just a touch of olive oil and some salt, and actually did use a little bit of monk fruit to sweeten it up a little bit. It's like a brown sugar substitute, um, and some ginger and garlic, and it is so tasty. It's gonna be staring at me the whole time. I'm just sitting there just salivating, but we'll get through this. So that is what's going on today, and then tomorrow, or I should say, for the rest of tonight and into tomorrow, the goal will be to start integrating some proteins. And so I'm going to start with um, some almond butter and move up into some more advanced proteins as far as in the plant world goes. I'm not going to do any animal proteins until after the fast is completely done. Uh, but that is the plan. So that's the fasting update. Now on to our topic at hand. And in classic DJ fashion, I did not prepare slides and things like this. So I'm actually going to pull that window up again. We'll rely on Bible Gateway once again. But I wanted to show you guys something. I actually credit my wife with this because, well, I mean, you should, right? But in this case, it's something she pointed out to me and I thought was interesting. If you recall, if you're with me early on in this process, by the way, feel free to say hi if you're watching live right now. I see some people on YouTube and some people on Facebook, so feel free to say hi. Hopefully, those comments will get there. I know in the Facebook group, sometimes the comments just come up as Facebook user because it's a closed group. So you'll have to say, "Hey, this is so and so," and hi, sort of thing. So, anyway, I wanted to point out something in Ecclesiastes. Ugh, type that was fascinating to me, and she mentioned this, and I thought to myself, self, you've heard this a lot in Ecclesiastes, haven't you? And so I actually read the entire book of Ecclesiastes this morning and saw that the thing I'm going to show you shows up all the time in Ecclesiastes. Like it's very much a common theme that runs through this. And the thing to understand about Ecclesiastes is it can be a little bit of a depressing book. It's you wonder if uh, it's attributed to King Solomon. He calls himself the teacher. He does not call himself King Solomon, but that's interesting that he doesn't call himself by name. But it's interesting to see just how much he had and how much he declares it to be just utterly meaningless. So yeah, there's that. But also, and I'm going to see if I can get the text bigger. I know that was a problem last time. Let me see if I can get the font size extra large. Okay, so let's see if I can go to the screen share. I want to screen share. No, I want to screen share that. Pardon me, I have multiple screens going on here, so sometimes choosing the right one is more difficult than you might think. Anyway, so yeah, you've got a lot of this meaningless kind of talk, and real motivating book. but but there's a lot of this kind of language of, you know, what do people gain by labors under which they toil under the sun, and it's interesting because it's not like we think that Solomon really had to labor much, but there's an awareness of that labor and that people are going through in his kingdom, and you know, for all we know, there might have even been some of that himself. There might have been some labors. Um, we do know from the context of Ecclesiastes that he was engaged in business and did do things to further the wealth of the kingdom. In fact, the we talk about talents, and that measure of talents actually is something that comes back to King Solomon, um, in a way that might freak some people out. But um, basically, it's like that 666 coins, is um, the year's wages or measure of a man, as it's sometimes called. So yeah, that comes back to Solomon. That was his uh, duty from. Ooh, I'm trying to remember what I've dug myself into a hole here of being able to remember about half of what I was thinking of. So I'm not a Bible authority, ladies and gentlemen. I am just somebody who digs this and spent a little bit of time studying it in college, and then much more in real life. But let me see if I can. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cheat. I'm actually going to pull up my notes here on the app on my phone because that's where they're actually highlighted. I didn't think to, like I said, didn't had plenty of time this afternoon. I just decided to take a nap because naps are good. So I did that instead. But one of the first times you see this, actually, there's a lot of things that are very familiar about these. A lot of things that are, um, actually, let's go back one. Let's look at this. Um, we see this passage a lot. What is Ben will be again. There's nothing new under the sun. We see that passage a lot, right? Um, but in context here, that kind of uh, the, you kind of tie in this phrase right here. It's all things are wearisome, more than one can say, and what is Ben will be again, What's been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. It's kind of like an Eeyore kind of a thing going on here, but but bear with it. The wisdom does come here. So I'm saying a lot. I shouldn't do that. I should yeah, I should be more professional. But you know, that whole fasting thing. So toil is meaningless is the one of the times this shows up first, I guess. But this work that is done is, grievous to me and that sort of thing. And it's what do people get for all the toil of anxious striving under the sun? All their work is grief. This too is meaningless. Now, what it says here is, I want to highlight this. A person can do no better than eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. Without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? So now it's very interesting that there's a shift from, toil being meaningless to saying, you know what? The best you can do is eat, drink, and be merry. That's what we've got here. And so Solomon's view of money, I guess you could say, varies pretty drastically from ours. He goes again in chapter 3, verse 22. And this is a very familiar Ecclesiastes 3 is a very often quoted, very often misquoted and out of context, but the time and season for everything. It's we think of the song that was written about it, that sort of thing. Mm, what's the very next thing that happens after the time and the season for everything, the time to do all these things? What's the very next thing that it says here? What a workers gain from their toil. What a what a workers gain. What is this? I've seen the burden that God laid on the human race, but He has made everything beautiful in His time. He's also set eternity in the human heart. It goes on, and I don't want to take the time to go through all of this today, but once again, this is actually very, very crucial. I'm going to highlight this. So I saw that there's nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work, because that is their lot. For who can bring them to see what will happen after them? In other words, this goes, and this is going to be the passage we talked about earlier. And we'll go back to it here in a minute. But when you consider the grand scope of things, when you consider the the way the God formed the universe here and put things together, if all we're trying to do is work to build something that will carry on beyond us, what Solomon is saying here is that is actually meaningless. There's no meaning to that. There should be a time to enjoy what you've earned, essentially. And so, yeah. So, and and again, this comes right back in. So, in chapter 4, once again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place in the sun. I saw all the toil and achievement. It's a chasing after the wind, he says. Which sounds like a lot of fun. So you see these phrases a lot, chasing after the wind, um, meaningless under the sun, those kind of things. Um, those kind of there's other translations that say this in different ways. I think they're all being polite. I think they're all, you know, choosing different words than what Solomon probably actually said. I don't know this for a fact, but I've always suspected that there could be more aggressive language here that's being used. Um, but the verse that was actually, I believe this is the verse that my wife actually highlighted to me that kicked this all off was in 5 verse 18. So this is what I've observed to be good, that a person to eat and drink in satisfaction for the toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given them, for this is their lot. Moreover, when someone gives wealth and possessions the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift from God. That, to me, is very key here in what we're talking about today. And just in general, just when you have an attitude about your work your work and your finances. This is the attitude that the most wise person in history had about this, is to say, you know what? It's appropriate for a person to eat, drink, and find satisfaction in their labor. Because after all, it's toilsome and it's not something you can bring with you. You can't work your way into heaven, for example. You can't do things here that will give you anything in heaven. Now, you could make the argument that working hard for a legacy, doing things like forming a trust and that sort of thing are good. And I would agree with that. And that's something that ultimately, not to get overly personal here, but when it comes to my wife and I, when we're gone, hopefully many years from now, there's no one coming up behind us necessarily, and so we will have to decide where that all goes. But we don't take it with us. We don't take that to heaven with us. There's other things we do, and that's what actually really makes me excited. You saw the smile on my face there. There's other things we do take to heaven, like impacting lives and that sort of thing. That does represent something we can take to heaven. But ultimately, what I'm getting at here is that we need to have a different attitude about our work. Where it's something where find satisfaction in your labor is something that really stands out to me. And yeah, maybe it's toilsome, but find satisfaction in it. In other words, there's no such thing as perfect work. There's always going to be, in whatever you're doing, there's always going to be something that is less than ideal, right? There's always going to be something that you would like to see done differently or better. But the reality is that we need to find satisfaction in that and actually enjoy that. We need to take, obviously, just to be clear, and we're going to talk about this here in a minute, but the first thing you should always do with the fruits of your labor is tithe that. That's not just a command, but I am telling you right now that there is joy in tithing. We like to go beyond that. We like to get into actually doing more of offerings. And so our tithe goes to the church, and then we'll have other things that are above and beyond that. Again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit when I cover some of the more financial stuff and when the appropriate disclaimers have been given and all that kind of stuff. But for us personally, we find great joy in being able to do that. I would say the one of the things about this last 6 months or so is that my income has actually dropped quite a bit, and I've actually been really sad that we haven't been able to give more. We've had opportunities, and we just had to say no, or just let it go, where we could create opportunities, and that has been really sad to me. But tithing, we always do. I It doesn't matter how much is coming in. I'll always tithe at least 10% because God has always been faithful to me. So that always should be the first thing. But what this passage is saying is that you should take some of that and enjoy life. Enjoy life with what you're earning. Don't just always be in save, 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 or if you're paying down debts, your biggest priority shouldn't be always to pay down debt at all expense of all others. You know, I love Dave Ramsey. I have several of his books up here. That Financial Peace University changed my life, but there comes a point where you have to enjoy some of that. You have to enjoy life, otherwise it's not worth living. And the funny thing is, Dave even says that. And so that's something, as a Nashville resident now, it's something actually better than that. Actually, his original offices were right up the road from us. It's one of the first places we saw. And fun fact, our first house that we rented here in Franklin was actually one of his properties. So, fun fact. But no, I've never actually had the opportunity to meet him, but I know several of his employees and many of his friends. But yeah, haven't had the opportunity yet, but we'll get there. So anyway, moving on here, and I'm actually going to skip a chapter ahead here. I'm going to get to actually, I do want to touch on this. Verse 6 is kind of confusing to me sometimes. It's one I wrestle with. It says, I've seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor, so that they lack nothing in their heart's desire, but God does not grant them the ability to enjoy them, and strangers enjoy them instead. This is a meaningless, grievous evil. It's kind of weird that Solomon just called something God gives evil. A little confusing. I'm not going to lie to you. Uh, but anyway, I think there's some truth there that it's not just all roses here for the wealth, and I think there's uh, probably some things implied here that if you if you don't enjoy your wealth, someone else will. Is I think what that's my interpretation anyway. Um, I'm sure some scholar out there at some point will correct me and call me a fool for thinking that way, but it would not be the first time. Moving on to chapter 7, another highlight here is verse 20. And this is something that some of you may recognize. It says that indeed there is no one on earth who is righteous, no one who does what right and what is right and never sins, never sins. That's something that Paul quotes very famously, and so I just wanted to point that out. And that's actually one of those things to keep in mind is that we're all fallible, we all sin, we all do things badly. We're not perfect, and so for one to be above another just never ever makes sense. And so I just wanted to point that out. Just a little thing to little pepper to throw out there. But just because I was reading that today, I was like, oh yes, one of my favorite verses. Uh, 8:15 is another one that I highlighted. Um, And this is actually something that is another philosophical kind of thing. So, in backing up to 14, there's something else meaningless that occurs on the earth. Righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked get what is righteous. The wicked to get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. Catch this. So, I commend the enjoyment of life because there is nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany them in their toil all the days of life that God has given them under the sun. Did you catch that? Did you catch the context there? Where it's talking about just one of the worst um kind of in philosophy. This is one of those Occam's razor type kind of things going on where there's a an edge here where you're not really sure where to stand on it. But the reality is that, you know, the saying goes that God makes the rain fall on the righteous and the wicked. And so sometimes it feels like the righteous are getting what the wicked deserve, and vice versa, the wicked are getting what the righteous deserve. This is something that I struggle with, honestly. I've actually really, yeah, I really struggle with this. Um, I look at things that are taken away from me, and I'm like, what's going on here? Why is this? Why are other people that are cheating getting away with it, but Well, if you haven't, you can't tell I'm talking about the government here. Why are they coming after me? I'm just doing things. I'm just doing things to better my fellow man. Why is that not favored and the other things are? So it can feel that way, like very much like I'm just not playing the game. So you know, and I don't want to get overly. I just I've lost my taste for politics. Um, but at the same time, it is a real tragedy that this happens. But catch here that the very next thing is like, you know what? It's meaningless. Whatever. So I commend the enjoyment of life because there's nothing better for a person under the sun, which means all of us, than to eat and drink and be glad. Nothing better for us to eat and drink and be glad. In other words, I'm not saying take out a loan to go on vacation, but if you've got the the immediate margin to do it, go do it. There's some obvious instruction here. There's some wisdom here in experiencing life. Not just always being in toil and not just always being worried about what's happening to you, but to say, you know what, things are going to happen to me. This is right along the lines of what I was saying early on, because I say this all the time, that you need to be prepared because things are always going to come. You don't want to have your level of preparation depending on maybe, this will work as long as nothing happens. That doesn't make any sense. And we're going to talk about that really soon when it comes to finances. We're going to talk about that exact concept of we don't want to be people that just think that nothing bad's going to happen to us. You know, let me zoom in on myself here and get right in the camera and tell you this. Bad things are going to happen to you. All right. Bad things are going to happen to you. It's going to happen, folks. It's just what it is. And so I want you to understand that it's not about avoiding this. It's about being prepared for it. And part of that preparedness is actually enjoying life. If you are constantly walking around like you're under threat, that is meaningless. That's a horrible, horrible way to live. Be prepared, yes, but be prepared by enjoying life and brushing things off. It's actually one of those character traits that people ask me about all the time, and I don't know how to quantify. If once I figure it out and can put it into books and instructions, I absolutely will do so. But one of the things that is a character trait of mine and very much something that I have learned over my years is that I just let things go. Just brush things off. I get comments all the time. It's like, "DJ, how can you be so calm? How can you just smile and laugh things off? This is weird." Because I mean, you can see my face. It's not like I have like wrinkles because I'm smiling all the time. That's not the case. Usually the most I get is like a smirk kind of a thing. The deep smirks. That's deep smirk, some of my friends call it. It's like, that's what you get out of me, right? But at the same time, I will laugh things off. When trouble comes to me, very often I will laugh about it first. That's my first response because I have learned the same thing that Solomon has learned here. It's a enjoy life. That's your first priority. That is your first sorry, that's not your first priority. Your first priority is to love God, love people. But in terms of these kind of things, it's very important to absolutely enjoy what life has to offer, because, we don't know how long we're going to be here and we don't know. And I'm not saying being reckless, and I'm not saying at all, go do things that are sinful. By no regards am I saying anything like that. There is lots to be had without a sinful lifestyle. In fact, I'm gonna get a little preachy here, so bear with me, but I would say that I have more enjoyment out of life without all the sinful things. This is something that I've I realized years ago, drifted away from, and am very much coming back to the realization now. It's like, you know what? Life is a lot better without all that stuff that I was doing. In the and largely because of something else that happened yesterday that I can't remember if I mentioned or not. It was something that I mentioned in an email. Um, yeah, it's probably not fair to mention names at this point. It's a private email conversation, um, but I noted that need for acceptance is something that I struggle with, and so that will cause me to do things that I think are enjoyable, that I think I'm enjoying, that other people around me are doing, but the reality is I'm not enjoying them. I'm not enjoying them at all. In fact, I'm very uncomfortable. But there's a lot of other things in life that I do enjoy greatly, and believe me, I love a good glass of wine. I love a good, um, whatever. But too many, I actually made the mistake, as I often do when I'm on any kind of a diet program of underestimating the impacts. And so that actually happened to me the last month, as I underestimated the impacts, and I was miserable. Not the next morning, yes, but during it, I was like, oh, I didn't want this. I didn't want this. I don't. You get what I'm saying, I hope. But the point is that you should enjoy life, but not to the detriment of your life. Let's move on to literally what I was about to say in chapter 9, verse 7. Go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. How cool is that? Now, it did not say just go be a glutton. Didn't say that. Didn't say go be a drunkard. Didn't say that. But he's saying enjoy these nice things. This is what your work has produced. Enjoy them. Likewise, whatever your verse 10, whatever your hands find to do it with all your might. For the realm of the dead where you're going, there's neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. You're not going to do much from that hole in the ground. That's just the reality. Now, where you're going, there's no need for it. It's not a requirement. Let's move on to chapter 10. Um, oh, sorry. Oops. I'm get in trouble for this. I don't care. It's something I found kind of just very amusing. I sat there and stared at this verse like, what? Really? Did is that a thing? It's right there. Sorry. Okay, my political views have been exposed, and so now I'll move on with the verse that kind of started this whole entire thing. This will be familiar to you now. Hopefully, this is something you've been reflecting on, like I have, and this is the invest in seven ventures, yes, in eight, for you do not know where its disaster will come on the land. And this entire chapter 11 is just awesome. Um, but there's some admonition here as well, as far as that goes. So anyway, I just realized it's like I've been giving a 36-minute sermon, and so I'm going to stop and actually get into the meat of today's today's thing. So while I'm doing that, let me check in here. Okay, I've got nobody viewing live, but that's fine. I'll catch you on the replay. Again, if you yeah, if you have any questions or anything like that of me, just let me know. If you want to engage me with any kind of deeper discussion, coaching, that sort of thing, I am making myself available. It's not going to cost you anything. It's just I want to get a sense for the struggles people are having, and if I can help. And if it's something that leads to a longer term relationship, hallelujah. But that's okay. I really do want to get in touch with people and see how they're struggling. And a few of you have already taken me up on this, and I appreciate that. And I'm glad that I've been able to speak life into your lives. And so we'll just hope that trend continues into 2021 and beyond. But I am typing up a disclaimer to put on the screen for everything I'm about to talk. I've been advised that this sort of thing is something that I need to have when I have conversations like this. So here's your disclaimer: always speak to a financial professional regarding any kind of business planning, financial planning, or otherwise. I am not said professional. So you can take my experiences and whatnot simply as my experiences. And if you can glean something from them to go talk to a financial professional, that is what I did. So do not just say DJ told me to and do that. Also, every situation is different. Results are not typical. Okay. Okay. Let's get into this. So the big question is, when do I know I should quit my day job and go work for myself? Yeah, that's the big question. But we're also going to talk a little bit to people that do not want to do that. If as Solomon said, the toil of your hands is something that you do enjoy, then keep enjoying it. And you can actually have these other ventures on the side and do these great things. There's a lot of great things you can do. Um, but anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to structure yourself, how I structure myself to stay more safe and to have a little bit of backing, which has been crucial in these last few months. So let's dive into this. First things first, almost every financial expert agrees that one of the things you absolutely should have is an emergency fund. I have not, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the last time we didn't have an emergency fund. I think we started our marriage with an emergency fund. So it's been more than 11 years that we've had a emergency fund in place of at least $1,000. Now we've only had to tap into that a couple times, but that's a start. When you're talking about running a business, it's my belief that you should have more. And this actually doesn't matter if you are looking at doing a side venture or if you're looking at doing something full time. I believe you should get to the point of having more. Now, it could be that your side venture is the thing that actually helps you get there, but that's one thing. The other thing that there's back and forth on, but I want to be really, you know, I like again, there's going to be these, you know, butting heads kind of things with the traditional like, Dave Ramsey kind of way of thinking and that sort of thing, or Sue Zorman or whoever you're looking to. I've actually found a lot of wisdom from um, Garrett Gunderson and um, some other folks like that recently that I've really liked. But what I will say here is that as far as debt goes, getting out of debt, at a personal debt, and I'm not talking about a mortgage. I'm pretty much talking about anything that has a revolving credit line and anything that has an interest rate above, let's say, 5%. That should absolutely be your priority to get out of that before you look into. Actually, I I would straight up advise you that if you start a business while still in debt, then you could be heading for trouble. This is something I experienced, unfortunately. So we were in the process of getting out of debt when in 2010, when I sorry, 2011, April 2011. So we're coming up on 10 years of this. That I lost a contract that I moved my wife and I to Chicago from Colorado in order to fulfill and kind of start a new life there. And with that being the kind of the linchpin. So I was actually I was only ever promised 6 months, so it was a risk on my part, and so we knew that going into it. Granted, that's a big piece of this, so don't think I was like a victim of anything. That's not the truth here. But at the same time, it was one of those things where there was a potential of it being, upwards of a 2 and 3 year engagement, possibly with a full time hire kind of a thing. So it was attractive enough that I went for it. And so the what ended up happening in that April is that I was let go. And fortunately, at that point, we actually had a little bit more than just an emergency fund. We had a little bit more, but we were also paying down debt. And that was actually kind of coincidental. Actually, it's one of those things where we were about to make some big payments, and we put that on pause, and just kind of went back to just paying just minimum balances until I could get another job. So what ended up happening is I went into consulting work for a company called Citrix, and the problem with that is that I was in as a third party individual. In other words, I was not an employee of Citrix. And so my contract was through a third party. And so, I was actually technically working with them, but even still, I was still an independent contractor. And so I had to basically form a business on the fly. And there are some things with that that I had thought about previously, so it wasn't a complete shock. And I'd run small little business ventures in the past as a side gig before. I had a DJ business, and before that, I had Starving Guitarist Press, which did um, music production and things like that very poorly, but we did it. But anyway, so it was not unfamiliar to me to have a side business. But what quickly happened is I realized that there were some things about this that were unexpected, and that is that I was spending money on flights and hotels and things like that and being reimbursed. Well, the problem is that there's a gap between when you spend the money and when you're reimbursed. There's the time period you're putting in expenses, and so we very quickly found that using our own cash for that was straight up dangerous, and so it became yeah, we it, I don't want to sound like I'm angry at the Dave Ramsey way of doing things because I think 99% of the time he's usually right about as terms of like the behavior mindset. The strategy though in this case actually ended up detrimental because what was happening is that I was using my debit card for travel and things like that. So I was actually draining my bank account, but I didn't have anything to put that back in right away. In some cases, actually, I think initially, one of the things that really hurt us was that there was a minimum of 45-day gap. But because of that gap, sometimes there were expenses beyond that, like booking a flight, a couple weeks before or something like that would make it so that you have now more like a 60-day gap between when the expense was made and when you're paid back for it. On top of that, the time to be paid back or paid for my invoices was also delayed even more than that. And so it would often be, you know, a month past. Actually, I think it was always just a month past submitting the invoice, but I could only submit the invoice on certain time frames. And so I very quickly found that, there was thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars going out. When you're traveling, it's not cheap. All right. That's the thing, especially for business. It's not a cheap thing. So for me, being an independent consultant, traveling all over the place, you know, it was very, very, very expensive. And we were taking that across our personal accounts. So that went on for a couple months until we we kind of figured out, okay, we need to treat this seriously and get a business account. And so that's one of the first things I recommend for any kind of venture that has an expense to it or generates revenue based on those expenses, that sort of thing, is you want to get yourself a separate checking account for that. Now, again, this is something that I knew. When I ran my DJ business, I had a separate account for that. When I ran my publishing company, I had a separate checking account for that. So this is not new for me. But the part that was new for me was getting a employee identification number and actually registering as a LLC or limited liability corporation. Previously, I'd always just gone as a sole proprietor and just kind of wrote it through on the taxes. So an LLC is a little different. But actually, what I found out was, and this is where talking to a professional is really important, is that the request here was to be a S corp or a C corp, which has different implications for insurance, for payroll, and for how you file taxes. You also have to file um, frequent tax payments with the IRS. Not necessarily true of a sole proprietor, although I'm sure that'll change. Um, Mark my words, in the next few years, it'll change a lot. Government's spending a lot of money right now, so business owners, heads up. It's going to get kind of interesting out there. They're going to want their money and they want their money now. Yeah. So there was some difficulty there adjusting to that as well. But the long and short of it was we ended up having to use credit cards for the first time in, you know, like 3 some odd years. And it was painful, but it's something we had to do. And so that is what I would classify as a appropriate use of credit. Um, these days, getting into some business things here. If your business is something that generates expenses, not just profit, certain things you can do out there as side ventures that pretty much just generate straight profit and have very minimal expenses. Or if you have an expense, it's maybe just like a 1 or 2 time expense. You know, all these example of my first book. My first book um, is kind of very quickly becoming my favorite. First of all, for some reason, it sells more than my second one. I think it's because it's cheaper, but it's also was minimal production cost. I did the cover myself. I did all the editing myself. I had a group of proofreaders that helped me hone that editing in a little bit, but ultimately it was just effort. And so the only expense I've ever had with that book is on my bookshelf behind me when I bought a bunch of copies to sign and send out to people that requested it. So that's been my only expense. But so that's something you can do at home, by the way. That's a decent side venture that we can get into a lot more detail at a later date. It's not appropriate for today's discussion, but a lot of things that can come out of that that also have very minimal, if not no expenses that you can do to generate a lot of revenue. But if you have something that requires a lot of materials or expenses like travel in order to conduct your business, then it's really important to either have, and I'll say either in a weird kind of way here. What was important for me was to have both a good line of credit that was a low interest, something I could just rely on if I needed to, a good credit card that was giving, good rewards. Sorry, Dave. Um, hey, you know what? The business expenses, they happen. That I'm not in control of the behavior there. But anyway, and then there's also a emergency fund for the business. Now, when I say emergency fund for the business, my goal is always to have 3 to 6 months of expenses covered in the um, in the emergency fund. And what I'll do is I'll automatically reimburse. the the credit card, um, unless there's a lull. And in the consulting world, that happens every now and then, where you'll just have, you know, a couple weeks where there's no work, and or in my case, there's been even months where there's no work, and so I will actually, you know, gauge whether I need to, um, you know, pause the credit card payments or not, or just reduce them or whatever. But there's been times like this last year where I've I've actually had to carry a pretty significant balance because I didn't know exactly what the next few months were going to look like. Um, so at the same time, that is something where, keeping a expense, or sorry, there's a reason for the 3 to 6 month expense thing, and that's that you always want to pay yourself first. Expense thing, the emergency fund thing. Sorry, you always want to pay yourself first, and so when it comes to your business, always make sure your family's taken care of. Going back to Ecclesiastes, it's that's what's important. Make sure your family has the food to enjoy on their table. Make sure they can enjoy themselves. Now, I'm not saying go on vacation. Be prudent. Come on. If you're not making any money and are finding yourself in debt, don't go on vacation. That's silly. Um, Now you may be able to be creative. For example, when the when the financial stress was actually getting kind of high, we decided for our anniversary, instead of like going somewhere fancy, we would just use some hotel points that I had accrued and go to a hotel here in the Smoky Mountains. And, so we had some food expenses and that sort of thing. We enjoyed ourselves. It was much cheaper than flying somewhere and getting a hotel and all those kind of things. So it's one of those things where it's just like you can find ways to enjoy yourself. But again, they might as well just call me DJ Tangent because that's kind of what I do. The bottom line is that having a emergency fund and a line of credit and a credit card and whatever it takes to make the income is really important when you have a business that has significant expenses tied to it. Fortunately, 2020 has been a year, or had been a year, where I didn't really do a lot of traveling, and so those usual expenses that I would have to be reimbursed for weren't really a factor. So I was actually really fortunate in that regards. Sounds kind of weird. I know you're not supposed to ever say that 2020 was a good year, but 2020 actually was a pretty good year for me in a lot of weird kind of ways. But anyway, so that's one thing. But anyway, the big question that I haven't answered is, and I just realized I'm coming up to the end of my time here, and should have made an outline. How do I know when it's time to leave my day job? And the answer to this is actually fairly straightforward. If you have a side venture that becomes a venture, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is working and I'm doing this along with my day job. It's a pretty happy moment in and of itself. But if that side venture starts to make more than you are taking in and your day job, that's your first signal. But hear me on this. My challenge to you, to avoid a lot of the drama that I see with others out there and the drama that I've experienced, is keep at it. You've already established that you can do it. You've already established that you can, in fact, keep going with your day job and the side venture. Use everything in that side venture to fund 2 emergency funds, fully funded. I want you to have 6 months of expenses in your personal account and 6 months of expenses in your business account. That is the signal when it's safe and okay to go ahead and quit your day job and put everything into your new side venture, which I'm willing to bet in most cases, once you do, we'll start making more than the 2 of them combined. All right. I hope that was helpful. There's a lot more. there's a lot more to cover with this, and the more I talk about it, the more I realize that it's so difficult to cover everything. And so, one of the things that I am looking to do is to formulate more of a structured program for this. So it's not just me rambling, but there's actually some structure to it. But I need to know if that's something that would be valuable to you. So if that's something that would be valuable to you, let me know if you want that kind of my perspectives on this. And again, not from a financial expertise kind of thing. When it comes to like forming a business, things like that. Like I said, I went and found an accountant to help me with all that, and sought legal advice on the formation of uh, the S corp or limited liability. I actually have a S corp and a limited liability company at this point. So, and then we're gonna form something for my wife here pretty soon too, I think. But yeah, it's those are the ventures, right? It's the seven, even eight ventures. But anyway, if it's something you feel like would be valuable, let me know privately, or just even put in the comments. That's fine. I'm going to be reviewing all those here shortly, and I'll look for any kind of people that have questions or anything like that. And hopefully, that's something that'll be valuable to you. At least I think it'd be fun to do, but as you can probably tell, it'd be enough work that I don't want to just do it and hope for the best. I want to make sure that that's something that people want to hear my perspective on, not just, you know, there's lots of people out there saying this kind of stuff, right? So if that's something you would like, let me know. Anyway, I am actually, like I said, I've got something that's coming up in a minute, and so I need to get off. But for tonight, great to be with you. Really excited to be with you tomorrow, as it'll be the end of the fast, and we'll be able to celebrate um, some things that have happened. I'm hoping that I have some things to share as far as some of our community, and but also in my own life. I think I shared some things today, but I want to put some additional things together. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. So I'll see you 4 o'clock Central Time tomorrow, right here, wherever here is. I'm streaming to multiple different locations right now. So wherever here is, see you at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Have a great evening. God bless.